Ladies and gentlemen, we finally have some solid, confirmed, verified, and fully complete information for you about the full public opening of Egypt's new Grand Egyptian Museum. Not just about the opening ceremony, which international visitors to Egypt are not interested in, but the actual final opening of the 12 remaining galleries of the museum that have still been shrouded in secrecy, plus the opening of the King Khufu funerary boat annex building behind the main museum building. The world has been waiting, and the gym itself has been completely silent on all of this information, despite already knowing it. And while it was recently announced that there would be a formal ceremony and other celebratory parties and events in early July to mark the completion of all remaining artifacts and displays, neither the Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities nor the gym's management company has actually disclosed to the public yet whether the visiting global public would finally get access to the last 12 remaining galleries and the Khufu boat annex before, during, or sometime after these celebratory parties and events. But just this month, in March of 2025, I personally spoke to Egypt's Minister of Tourism and Antiquities myself while we were together at an event in Berlin. And I asked him directly and unequivocally when the global public could finally access all of the galleries, displays, and exhibits of the Grand Egyptian Museum. And it was at this event where we finally got a direct, on the record answer. But first, let me tell you why we couldn't trust anything we've heard so far, and why obscure reports out of Egypt of the dates of the multi day series of celebratory opening parties and events did not at all tell us what the world was waiting to hear and what we really wanted to know: when they would allow the world into the galleries of the Grand Egyptian Museum, especially the still closed off Tutankhamun galleries and the restored Khufu funerary boat exhibit. These are two of the biggest draws of the entire museum, yet thus far they have remained closed and even incomplete. Throughout the gym's so called soft opening period, only limited portions of the massive museum complex were accessible for the visiting public to actually see. At first, this only included the main common areas, such as the grand atrium, the exterior courtyards, the gift shop, and some cafes and restaurants inside of the complex. And later, the grand opening staircase area was added to the list of publicly accessible areas, which allowed visitors to ascend to the top of the massive statue lined staircase and overlook the pyramids of Giza through the massive windows that make up the museum's south facing facade. Then, finally, came the public opening of 12 of the museum's 24 main galleries, which showcased Egypt's history through artifacts from every period of its ancient past. But still, the other 12 galleries that will hold the crown jewels of Egypt's treasure collection remained off limits, with not even the slightest concrete information being shared with the public about when the world might expect to be able to see a fully open Grand Egyptian Museum. Here is where I really feel compelled to say that not sharing an opening date for these remaining 12 galleries, plus the Khufu funerary boat annex, the most important parts of the new museum, was a real failing on the part of the ministry all this time. Tens of millions of tourists all over the world have been kept in an unnecessary holding pattern, unable to plan their trips to Egypt because of the lack of information about the gym's full opening date. This not only stalled their travel plans, and even caused millions of people to decide to divert vacations to other countries instead of planning trips to Egypt with concrete dates. But it also hurt the tens of millions of Egyptians whose lives and livelihoods depend on tourism, as well as the government of Egypt, whose public budget heavily depends on growth and sustainment within the tourism industry. Very little information was shared with the global public about progress at the gym and its anticipated full opening date, or even partial openings that happened along the way. The company that manages the gym, which has a full-time public relations team, by the way, was completely absent in properly communicating to the global public about progress and developments at the gym over the past several years. This professional public relations failure was inexcusable, and it left uncompensated and unappreciated volunteers like myself being the only ones who were willing to try to actually find out information and share that information with the global traveling public. There has been a lot of speculation over the years about an expected anticipating opening date or month or year for the Grand Egyptian Museum. We had even seen ministers predicting time frames before, only for these time frames to come and go without not only an opening, but without even an apology or an update. Unsurprisingly, this pattern of silence about the most basic information related to the Grand Egyptian Museum has left a very bad impression of Egypt with millions of travelers around the world. So it came as no surprise that when we did finally get word of at least a planned opening ceremony, which does not necessarily equate to a full public opening, very few outside of Egypt were willing to report on it or take it seriously pending further confirmation. The issue was not only that the world had heard of predictions from ministers before that came and went, but that even the most recent obscure revelation, not via any press release or official statement, but as comments made on a local talk show, was not even related to the actual full opening to the public, but rather the celebratory events that the government wanted to put on to celebrate the completion of the Grand Egyptian Museum. However, these events and ceremonies and parties, while important to Egyptians and to the government, are the last thing that international tourists who want to visit Egypt actually care about. Literally no one outside of Egypt cares about any grand opening ceremony. All everyone wants to know is when the King Tutankhamun treasures will finally be transferred from the old Egyptian Museum in downtown Cairo to the Grand Egyptian Museum, and when the final 12 artifact galleries and the Khufu funerary boat annex will finally be open so that everyone can actually make concrete plans for the future. That last part is what was blatantly missing from all of the recent talk about grand opening ceremonies and multiple days of parties and events to follow that. Not one person, neither at the ministry nor at the gym's managing company, shared any information with the global public about what really matters to tourists. And no one even made an attempt to clarify and pin down the ministry about that critical missing information for the benefit of the global public. Until now. Earlier this month, I flew to Berlin to attend a meeting with Egypt's Minister of Tourism and Antiquities, where I explained to him that the announcement about opening ceremonies, events, and parties were not what the global public wanted to know about, and that what everyone was waiting confirmation on is when all of the galleries and buildings of the gym would finally be accessible. Although I don't have video of that on-the-record exchange with the minister, I do have audio of it, and I want to share that audio with you so that you can hear this news directly from the minister himself.
Hi, John Navarre with Middle East Travel and Tourism Magazine. We understand that you intend to host the opening ceremony for the gym on July 3rd, but what we haven't been hearing, and I think what most people who are holding off on trips until after the gym fully opens, what we haven't been hearing is Does that also mean that all of the galleries, including the Khufu building, will also open after that date?
That's true.
They will?
They will. With the three parts.
All three parts?
All three parts.
Okay.
Galleries part, including King Tut, the museums, and also the research center will be also.
Okay, and just real quick, related to that, will the museum be closed for 1 or 2 days to the public for the grand opening ceremonies? And then lastly, will the King Tut treasures that are in the old museum be transferred to the new museum overnight in 1 day? Is there going to be a delay in which visitors may miss them on a couple of days? How's that going to work?
We're working on it. We might be forced to apologize for our customers for a short duration of moving the treasures, but we will try to make the customer experience not affected as much as possible.
But July 3rd, they'll all be there.
July 3rd is definitely going to.
Okay, thank you.
So, as you just heard, Egypt's Minister of Tourism and Antiquities just personally confirmed to me on the record that all galleries, exhibits, and exhibitions would be finished and all artifacts would be in place within the gym before July 3rd, 2025. And that after that date, they would all be open and available for the public to see. However, if you listened closely, the minister did also say that there may be 1 or a few days before July 3rd when the King Tut treasures might not be available on display at either the old downtown museum or at the gym. This is very important because everyone visiting Egypt for the first time wants to avoid missing these most famous of all ancient Egyptian treasures. Now, the minister didn't say this exactly, but reading between the lines, I can pretty much guarantee you that the King Tut treasures that are still on display in the old Egyptian museum will be unavailable for a few days in early July, perhaps even up to a week or so, at the end of June as well, because they're going to be transferred to the new museum in a big public televised parade, just like they did with the Royal Mummy Collection when they moved the mummies of 22 ancient Egyptian pharaohs from the old museum to their new home in the National Museum of Egyptian Civilization, a different new museum, back a few years ago. While the rest of the world obviously does not care about these parades and spectacles, they actually mean a lot domestically within Egypt to both the government and to Egyptians. It's a chance for them to put on a big public production, and the local public feels proud when watching it. Egypt doesn't get a chance to be in the spotlight often, so the country really values the few opportunities it has to put on big shows like this, which, as I said, are mostly for the viewing pleasure of Egyptians. Meanwhile, what's important to the rest of the world is that they hurry up with the show and the ceremonies and the parties and just get it all over with so that everything in the museum is finally fully open and accessible for tourists to visit. So, what does all of this mean when it comes to planning travel to Egypt? Well, for starters, it means that you should try your best to avoid travel to Egypt during the time of these events. There will not only be a shortage of hotel rooms and a spike in prices around this time, but you might also miss some of the artifacts and treasures being on display. There will also be massive road closures, historic traffic congestion, and it's just not going to be a good time to be in and around Egypt generally, and Cairo specifically. Therefore, my best advice would be to avoid planning trips to Egypt from about the 20th of June until the 10th of July during this year, 2025. If you can avoid those 21 days, that would be best. If you already have a trip that overlaps some of those dates, I would say that the worst period within that range is going to be from about the 30th of June through the 5th of July. The 3rd of July falls on a Tuesday this year. If you look at a calendar, that's basically 3 days before and 3 days after that July 3rd date. That week will be the peak of the chaos. but I would still avoid traveling the week before and the week after that peak if you can. July and August are the worst months to visit Egypt anyway in terms of the temperature. In normal years, the sites tend to be the slowest, precisely because few people want to come to Egypt at the peak of the summer heat. But this year, it will be even less desirable to come during the beginning of that summer peak period in early July. With that said, however, late July and August could be an ideal time to come if you don't mind the heat. The crowds and the overcrowding from the ceremonies and events will have died down, but it will still be the low season when the fewest tourists generally visit Egypt. But remember, this period is only for heat lovers and desert lovers. If you can't tolerate extreme temperatures, don't visit when it's an oven. I've seen so many people over the years think they can handle the heat of an Egyptian summer, and they woefully regret it once they get here and it hits them. The peak of summer also means that you have to go to the sites much earlier in the morning because the temperatures are too high to start venturing out at a normal hour later in the morning. And don't forget, in the south of Egypt, such as in Luxor, Aswan, and Abu Simbel, it gets even hotter than it does in Cairo. In Abu Simbel, which is the southernmost tourist site in all of Egypt, very close to the border with Sudan, you can fly down there super early in the morning and still be breaking a sweat at 6 a.m. Or in Luxor, which is famous not only for its magnificent tombs and temples, but also for hot air ballooning over those tombs and temples in the morning. But it's common to also have to have 3 a.m. or 3:30 a.m. pickup times for hot air balloon rides for two reasons: to beat the heat, because hot air balloons cannot take off once the temperature rises above a certain level each day, and to make the sunrise, which is much earlier in the summer months. Now, for anyone who has to go to Egypt during the summer, I never want to discourage you from going. The best time to visit Egypt for some people is whenever you can. Not everyone can take a vacation during the spring or the winter months. If you have to go during the summer because of vacation periods or the kids' school holidays, or because that's just when everyone you want to go with can all travel at the same time together, then by all means do it. I just want you to be prepared for what you can expect and plan for it, which in the end will make your trip better and more enjoyable. And as I wrap up, I do just have one more piece of advice for those planning trips to Egypt for after the summer of 2025. Remember that the high season in Egypt usually runs from October through April. And this high season will be the first one after the gym is fully open. That means that it's going to be unusually busy. And that means that hotels are going to book up, flights are going to book up, tour operator slots are going to book up, guides, drivers, vehicles are all going to get snatched up well in advance, as they usually are every year during high season. People often don't believe me when I tell them that the best tour companies in Egypt and the best hotels always book up for the peak of the high season every year, which is December and January, sometimes 8 or 10 months in advance. So by February, many peak high season days and weeks for the next winter season are already fully booked, and the remaining inventory can be very expensive. And with the gym fully opening this summer, this coming high season, spanning the fall, winter, and spring of the 2025-2026 season in Egypt, is expected to be unusually busy. And busy even earlier than normal as people from all over the world plan long delayed and long awaited trips to Egypt to see the country's sites and monuments, complete with the full new museum open. So, all this is to say, please don't wait until the last minute to get on someone's calendar now that you know when the high season will be and when peak demand will be in Egypt this year and every year. Planning a trip to Egypt and locking in at least a preliminary itinerary with a company 6 to 18 months out is perfectly normal for a challenging destination like Egypt. If you make the mistake of thinking Egypt is like Paris or Rome or London, and you can just book everything you'll need there a few days or a few weeks before your trip, you're going to be left with the bottom of the barrel, the scammers and the scavengers, in terms of available resources, services, and service providers on the ground here. But you, my friends, are the smart ones. I know. If you've made it this far in this video update, then that's because you're a prudent, responsible, research oriented traveler, and you're already doing the right thing and in the right frame of mind to manifest the trip of a lifetime to and around Egypt. As always, please always feel welcome to check EgyptElite.com for the #1 Western led tour operator in Egypt, and the Egypt Travel channel on YouTube for extensive independent advice, resources reviews, and help related to all things travel in Egypt. Until next time, my friends, I'm John Navarre, and you can always consider me your guy on the ground here in Egypt. Ma salama.